Alan Gill's first meeting with the Queen is one of his earliest memories.
I was 5 years old and I found myself next to her and the Duke of Edinburgh with my dad in the Royal Enclosure at Ascot races. That when she talked to you, you were the only person in the room.
David Godwin is another of the 300 veterans living here.
I've always carried a framed picture of Her Majesty around, so wherever I've served, wherever I've lived, there's been a picture of Her Majesty on my wall somewhere.
Such is the reverence and affection many here hold. The Royal Hospital in Chelsea was somewhere that the Queen visited regularly throughout her reign. In fact, she first came before her reign even began, back when she was princess in 1947. At that point, women weren't allowed to live here. The hospital was founded 300 years ago by Charles II. John Gallagher met the Queen at a party at Buckingham Palace.
First thing she would do would go to the roast chestnut stall, and she loved roast chestnuts. And she came up and I said, well, can I take this opportunity to wish you a very Merry Christmas from all your Chelsea pensioners? Because we are very confident that we were her pensioners. It was just one of the proudest moments in my life. She was our figurehead. United in grief, all of us, and we'll never forget her.
These men and women served, put their lives on the line in her name.
Good evening. Well, we've got some rain around this evening and overnight, and some of it could be a bit heavy at times. Tomorrow, after a damp start, things are going to improve, though, turning brighter, hopefully some sunshine on its way. And then over the next few days, a lot of dry weather, but you'll notice it's starting to turn a bit cooler, both by day and by night, starting to feel really a bit more autumnal. Now, if you take a look at the pressure chart, you can see what's going on. So these are the fronts that have brought the showers tonight, or that rain tonight. They'll start to move out of the way. High pressure continues to build over the next few days. You'll start to notice those wind arrows coming down from the north, and that's what's going to turn things a little bit cooler. There might be the odd shower at times, but a lot of dry weather and a bit of sunshine in the mix as well. Right, back to you tonight and back to that rain. So as I said, some of those bursts could be quite heavy. That could affect driving conditions. There might be quite a lot of surface water around, and maybe even a rumble of thunder. And quite a lot of that rain does tend to linger. With a lot of that moisture in the air, it's probably going to be a little bit muggy, a little bit humid. The temperature's quite mild as we end the night. So we start tomorrow on a bit of a grey, damp, murky note. But as I said, the day improving. Quite a lot of that cloud hanging around, but it starts to clear. Maybe still just the odd bit of rain. And particularly from the north, you can start to see some sunshine emerging as the day goes on. The temperatures as a result doing okay, still getting up into the low 20s, but it is with less moisture in the air just going to feel a little bit fresher. And then if you've got plans for the evening, you can see that sunshine continuing to move across us. So really, all being well, quite a nice end to Wednesday. Now into Thursday and the rest of the week, we hold on to quite a lot of dry weather. Friday to the east coast, probably going to be a bit blustery, and there could be the odd shower there, but inland staying dry. The sunshine in the mix as well, and you can see those temperatures just starting to come down a bit as we go through the days and at night time as well. That's it for now. Have a lovely evening. Good night.
Good evening from Buckingham Palace as we wait for the Queen to return here for the last time. To applause and tears, Her late Majesty has finally left her beloved Scotland. Thousands lined the route as her coffin travelled to Edinburgh Airport. Overnight and throughout the day, thousands of mourners paid their respects at her lying at rest. Tonight, her coffin is on its way to London ahead of her lying in state, and after that, her funeral. It will be received by the King, who earlier made his first visit as monarch to Northern Ireland and pledged to follow his mother's path of peace.
Buckingham Palace, this is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening from Buckingham Palace, where the Queen's coffin will rest tonight as this historic building plays one last ceremonial role in her life story. She will be placed in the Bow Room before a procession will take her coffin to Westminster Hall tomorrow for her lying in state. Now, that follows the remarkable reception she received in Scotland. Her love for the country and its people reflected in the really incredible scenes as thousands lined the route of her last journey. And the Queen's wider legacy was also remembered today as the new King visited Northern Ireland. Charles said he would continue her groundbreaking efforts to promote peace and reconciliation. James Mates looks back at the day's events so far.
For 24 hours, the coffin of Her late Majesty has lain at rest in St Giles Cathedral, Edinburgh. Queen Elizabeth, Queen of Scots, beginning the final journey out of her Scottish lands. Her subjects here, many thousands of them, have taken the chance to pay their last respects at whatever time of the day or night they were able. Now she returns to England to lie in state, to be laid finally to rest. The only sound, a piper's lament. While the King continues his visits to the four capitals of the Union, it is the Princess Royal who will accompany their mother's body. King Charles has inherited a union of 4 nations, but maintaining that union may be the greatest challenge of his reign. All 4 national capitals will have the chance to pass on their condolences to him and his family. Today's visit to Belfast, a conscious attempt to build on his mother's legacy, that being above politics gives the monarchy great moral power to bring people together. The streets of central Belfast lined with crowds waiting for their first glimpse of the new king. It's a testament to how much the situation has changed in Northern Ireland that a public walkabout by a monarch should provoke so few security concerns. The power of a king, or just the power of celebrity, whatever it was, it worked its magic on these 2 schoolboys. Outside Hillsborough Castle, the King and Queen took the chance to see the thousands of bouquets of flowers left in the late Queen's memory.
Long save the King! Long save the King! Long save the King!
Inside, he was greeted by the pageantry, with which, in just a few days, we've become very familiar. But there was a significance here that went way beyond protocol. He met the province's most senior politicians, but Northern Ireland has no devolved government right now. If it had, the First Minister would be Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill, committed to leaving the UK and with it the monarchy.
Thank you so much for the incredibly kind things that you said about Roma.
Well, she played a great role here in terms of reconciliation and building peace, so it's the end of an era for sure.
And then from the Speaker of the Stormont Parliament, Sinn Féin's Alex Maskey, a former member of the IRA. He spoke of his respect for the King's mother.
She personally demonstrated how individual acts of positive leadership can help break down barriers and encourage reconciliation. She personally underlined that one tradition is not diminished by reaching out to show respect to another. I want to acknowledge that your own words and actions over the years have already shown that you are seized of the importance of reconciliation and are committed to playing your full part in that.
My mother felt deeply, I know, the significance of the role she herself played in bringing together those whom history had separated and in extending a hand to make possible the healing of long-held hurts. Now, with that shining example before me, and with God's help, I take up my new duties resolved to seek the welfare of all the inhabitants of Northern Ireland.
At a moment when the Good Friday Agreement is under pressure and the Northern Ireland Protocol divides both the province and Westminster, words of reconciliation are again of vital importance. This is no time for politics, but as they waited for the King's arrival at a service of reflection and thanksgiving in St Anne's Cathedral, Belfast, Liz Truss met Ireland's Taoiseach Micheál Martin for the first time as Prime Minister. New government, new monarch, new start, many will be hoping. The Queen spoke often of her affection for Northern Ireland. In return, they have spoken throughout today of what she achieved here.
The word which I think will be most associated with Queen Elizabeth and Ireland, North and South, is reconciliation.
Within the last hour, the Princess Royal joined the Guard of Honour from the Royal Regiment of Scotland as the coffin was taken from the hearse to be carried by the Royal Air Force to Northolt in West London. This time the RAF given the honour of providing the bearer party. The last flight home. By tonight, Her late Majesty will be back at her home to lie at rest in the throne room of Buckingham Palace. James Mates, ITV News.
So this is what's set to happen in the next few hours. Shortly before 7 p.m, the Queen's coffin is expected to land at RAF Northolt, where it will be met by a Guard of Honour from the Queen's Colour Squadron. The cortege will then travel to Buckingham Palace, where it will be received by the King and the Queen Consort, as well as other members of the royal family. The Queen will then remain at rest at Buckingham Palace overnight, until tomorrow, when the coffin will be moved from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall. There, the vigil begins, and the Queen will lie in state for 4 days. And let's go straight over to RAF Northolt, where they are preparing for the arrival of the aircraft carrying the Queen's coffin. And Rebecca Barry is there for us. Rebecca.
Well, the Queen's coffin is now making its way through the skies over the United Kingdom to here, RAF Northolt in West London. We expect it to arrive in around half an hour or so. The RAF members involved in this face a task like no other, accompanying their former Commander-in-Chief, the monarch to whom they swore allegiance to, now accompanying her in her final journey from Scotland to England. The Queen's coffin will arrive here in a military aircraft, a C-17 Globemaster. Most recently it was used for transporting military equipment and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Now it's carrying a uniquely precious passenger. The coffin will be met by a guard of honour made up of 96 RAF pilots. Coincidentally, that mirrors the 96 years of the Queen's long life. The squadron will give a royal salute before the hearse departs here, making its way to Buckingham Palace, where it will be met by the King. Just imagine how many times he's met his mother in that palace, yet now he is the sovereign and, above all, a son in mourning.
Rebecca Berry at RAF Northolt, thank you for the moment. And we will return to RAF Northolt as and when that plane comes into land. And our Royal Editor Chris Shipp is here with me. Another extraordinary day. There is a great deal that's going to be happening over the next few hours at Buckingham Palace. So talk us through what to expect.
Well, the focus now very much shifts to this corner of England and the events that we will see, of course, in the coming days in London. A couple of significant changes that we should point out as soon as that giant aircraft lands at RAF Northolt. One is that the Royal Standard in Scotland has been removed in flight and the Royal Standard has been replaced, and that's because the Queen's coffin is arriving in England. And also, when the bearer party carry the coffin out of the plane, it will then be placed into the state hearse, and it's the job of the state hearse to drive the Queen's coffin from RAF Northolt to here at Buckingham Palace. Well, we've already seen the King arrive in the last few minutes. Other members of the royal family will be here as well. We'll get some more detail on that in the next hour or so. But their job is to welcome the return of the coffin to Buckingham Palace, the headquarters of the British monarchy, a place that the Queen was so familiar with, but hasn't actually lived here since she moved out just before the pandemic. But she will spend just the one night here in the bow room. There will be chaplains keeping watch through the night, and a prayer will be said when the coffin enters the bow room. And it's a private moment for the royal family, as opposed to the very public days which will follow.
So it's the family's last chance to have her to themselves, in effect, I suppose.
Effectively so, yes. I mean, what we often say about this particular family having to, share its grief with the nation, but it's for them personal grief. It's the King's mother, it's Princess Anne's mother. She's just travelled on the plane with her mother's coffin. It's a very private moment for them, and therefore there will be no cameras to see the royal family receive the coffin when it does come back to Buckingham Palace.
And we have just had a statement actually from the Princess Royal saying it's been an honour and a privilege to accompany her mother, and that will just be coming through to you right now.
Yeah, of course, the Princess Royal, if you'll excuse me while I get that statement, Mary, the Princess Royal has accompanied the coffin from Balmoral, of course, and we saw her in the car behind the hearse, and we will imminently receive that. I don't have the statement at the moment, but I'm sure we will bring it to you in due course. But yes, the job that she's had for the Queen's daughter, who's remarkably composed. I think she is, it's been a real challenge for her. That's a real understatement, isn't it?
It's a heavy responsibility, isn't it?
In recent times. So here we go. We finally got the statement for you from the Princess Royal. It reads this: I was fortunate to share the last 24 hours of my dearest mother's life. It has been an honour and a privilege to accompany her on her final journeys. Witnessing the love and respect shown by so many on these journeys has been both humbling and uplifting, she writes. I'll read you the whole statement, Mary, because I think we're talking here about the Queen's daughter, who has spent so much time with her mother's coffin. The Princess Royal goes on: we will all share unique memories. I offer my thanks to each and every one who share our sense of loss. We may have been reminded how much her presence and contribution to our national identity we took for granted. I'm also grateful for the support and understanding offered to my dear brother Charles as he accepts the added responsibility of the monarch. I think that is the first time we've heard one of his siblings refer to him as king. And the Princess Royal signs off: to my mother, the Queen. Thank you.
Oh. It's very touching, isn't it? And while you were reading that statement, we were looking at pictures of the coffin leaving Edinburgh, and we will later in the programme talk about the extraordinary scenes that we saw there, the streets lined with crowds wanting to say a final farewell. And it wasn't just on the Royal Mile that people came to pay their respects. Thousands queued through the night into the early hours to file past the coffin. as it lay at rest. And thousands more lined the route as the Queen was taken to Edinburgh Airport, as we were saying this afternoon. And our correspondent Peter Smith now on Scotland's send-off.
As dawn's first light broke through the stained glass in St Giles Cathedral, thousands were still waiting patiently. But what's a few hours in a queue for a monarch who gave 70 years of service?
If it happened in England, I wouldn't have been able to be there, but it's happened in Scotland, and in a nutshell, that's why I'm here today. I was raised as a royalist. It's the love that I have for the country.
This has been the Queen's final day in Scotland, one last chance for the people of this nation to pay their respects.
I never had much to do with the royals because I always felt they were English, but over the few weeks I've realised, no, she's been more Scottish and more into people in Scotland.
Having waited since 4 o'clock this morning, Tracy and David reached the front. She gave a bow and wiped a tear from her eye.
I'm ex-forces myself, so I've actually served for her. And yes, I'm very glad that we actually got the chance.
And that's why you were so determined?
Yeah.
You queued for 12 hours?
Yes.
And when you reached the front, what was going through your mind?
Just feeling very sad.
You're very emotional about this?
No, because I had a chance to see the Queen the last time.
The last monarch to die in Scotland was in 1542, King James V, and it was his crown on top of the Queen's coffin. History in our times, and historian David Torrance in red at the top of the screen came to experience it.
Very Scottish. The Royal Standard of Scotland draped over the Queen's coffin, the Royal Company of Archers standing guard with heads bowed.
You have just lived through history. Did it feel like that when you were there?
It did feel significant, yeah. It means that this accession, when it's written up by future historians, Scotland will feature more prominently than at any time since the 16th century.
30,000 people passed through St Giles Cathedral in under 24 hours. Thousands more had to be turned away.
This is literally the end, so
we got very lucky.
Yeah, we're really lucky. So it'll be really good. Hopefully we'll get in to see her.
They did make it, the last members of the public in Scotland to see the Queen here.
How lucky we were as the last people, and now, you know, the doors are closed and she's going down to London. So we really...
Yeah, leaving her beloved Scotland for the last time.
In the last few days, Scotland has played its part. Now the Scottish people have said their final farewell to a Queen who so loved her time here. Peter Smith, ITV News, Edinburgh.
And our correspondent Emma Murphy is in Edinburgh and has been for the last couple of days. And Emma, it has been an extraordinary occasion, hasn't it?
It really has, Mary, and you can see behind me now the streets are getting back to normal. The hush that descended here has lifted. The cathedral is empty and Scotland's Queen has left this country. But nobody who witnessed what went on here over the past few days will ever forget it. Scotland was never expecting to really get this opportunity to pay tribute to their monarch, because had she not died in Balmoral, this would not have been an option for them. And there is great relief that it went off so well, and there is also great pride at the kind of send-off they were able to give the Queen. You know, she spoke about the fact that she had a very deep and abiding affection for Scotland, particularly for Balmoral. And really, over the past few days, we have seen Scotland come out to display to the whole world what an incredibly deep and abiding affection this country, certainly large parts of it, have for the Queen.
Emma Murphy, outside St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, thank you. And I'm being told the plane carrying the Queen on her final flight has just passed over Birmingham on its journey here to Buckingham Palace, and we'll keep you up to date with that. But in the meantime, let's have a look at what is going to be happening over the next few days. And tomorrow, her coffin will travel in a procession led by the King from Buckingham Palace to the Palace of Westminster. Then there will be a short service conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury to begin 4 days of the Queen lying in state. Meanwhile, on Friday, the King will continue his tour of the UK nations as he heads to Wales. A nationwide minute's silence will be observed on Sunday night at 8 o'clock, and then on Monday, a state funeral for the Queen will take place at Westminster Abbey. So the focus now turns very much to London, where huge numbers are expected for the lying in state and indeed the funeral. There have already been large crowds around Buckingham Palace and Green Park here just behind me, all of them keen to play their part in history, as Romilly Weeks reports.
In Green Park, every tree has been garlanded, as though nature itself has sprung into bloom for the Queen. And still more people are arriving by the minute, the emotion taking some by surprise.
I didn't expect to feel this way.
Yeah, and it was seeing the flowers and seeing all the people that's been really moving.
Yeah, it's made me more emotional, but seeing the amount of people, and on the train, everyone's talking about it, in the station, everyone's talking about it, just on everybody's lips. It's just, you knew that it was going to be big. I didn't expect this emotion.
Little Lottie has brought her own special picture for the Queen.
This is the Queen. It has a starry hour and a star for being a good queen.
She was a good queen, wasn't she?
All day the crowds have been building ahead of the return of the Queen's coffin to the palace, which was for years her home. 79-year-old Sandra has been waiting all day.
I've seen the coffin on television, but we wanted to see it here. We can't go to the laying in state because it's just so long a queue. It would be too much.
Ahead of the lying in state tomorrow, the Queen's coffin will be taken from Buckingham Palace at 2:22 p.m. in a procession up the Mall, followed by the King and other members of the royal family, across Horse Guards Parade, past Downing Street and the Cenotaph, arriving at Westminster Hall at 3 p.m. Those right at the start of the queue are bedding in for a very long wait. Marion, one of those who'll sleep out tonight.
Yeah, my family said, no, you're crazy, They're not, I don't want to miss it.
And you're not put off by the practicalities, the having to camp overnight, the standing for long hours in the rain?
Absolutely not. It really, in fact, I bring it on, is what I say. I am absolutely not fazed by it at all. This woman means so much to me that it's the least I can do.
The assumption is that up to 750,000 people could want to come and see the lying in state in person, joining the hardy souls who are already queuing. Some may well have been put off by the warnings of waits of up to 35 hours. But even if only half that number come, it would still mean queues snaking the length of the South Bank behind me here, past some of London's most famous landmarks, onto this bridge, into Westminster, and finally into the hushed atmosphere of the historic Westminster Hall.
Over the coming days, we'll have our last chance to bid goodbye to the Queen in person, and many don't intend to miss it. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
Well, Ben Chapman is with people who started queuing yesterday for the lying in state in Westminster. And Ben, what are people saying to you?
Well, they're just determined, really, to have their moment alone with the Queen as she lies in state just across the river from here at Westminster Hall. This queue has been getting steadily longer by the hour over the course of today, and although the doors to Westminster Hall don't open until 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, people have been coming down here, getting their place nice and early. Everyone has their own reason for doing so. One woman told me that she has to be at work first thing Thursday morning, and so this is her only chance. So a man said that he'd rather be sitting and waiting in one place rather than joining what will become a constantly moving line over the course of the next few days, potentially hundreds of thousands of people snaking what could be many miles along the south bank of the River Thames. Now, people down here are pretty well supplied. There are plenty of sandwiches, plenty of biscuits, cold coffee being drunk in one case as people bring the provisions they feel they'll need to get them through the night. And there is also a real camaraderie down here that I've witnessed today. People looking out for each other, people watching each other's belongings as they nip off for a comfort break. What you'd expect, really, at times like this. And what unites them all, what I've heard a a lot today is the sense that people feel they just really need to be here, and that waiting out for hours is the least they can do to honour the Queen's lifetime of service.
Ben Chapman on the other side of the river at Westminster, thank you for the moment. And I'm joined by the royal historian Anna Whitelock, who's here with me, and Chris Shipp. And one can't overstate it, really, extraordinary scenes. And London is now preparing to welcome the Queen back.
Yeah, I mean, it really does feel poignant. The rain's coming down, everybody's standing there with their umbrellas. There's police along the route in their traditional Metropolitan Police uniforms. There's something really timeless about this scene, and there's something heavy in the air. The Queen is on her way home, and as commuters kind of make their way out of offices, there is a sense, and it's not overstating it, that London is gradually coming to a halt for this moment.
And we are hearing that the Queen's flight is about 15 minutes away from RAF Northolt, and you can see that the military is getting ready to welcome her there. And another amazing piece of ceremonial awaits us, doesn't it, Chris?
Yes, we shouldn't be surprised, of course, that the Queen's flight is on time. It left on time from Edinburgh Airport in that beautiful sunshine, but what a difference the welcome here. I think the rain that we've got here at Buckingham Palace is probably, by the look at that camera lens there, has reached RAF Northolt, just a few miles up from here. So, yes, a different, sombre, perhaps. You know, the weather's changed, but then we're about to embark on several days of quite significant events here in London. We've mentioned the last night that the Queen will spend in Buckingham Palace, and then we've got a procession up the Mall and Horse Guards and Westminster Hall. And then there's this real sense of anticipation in terms of the lying in state about how many people are going to want to do that. And you just saw from Ben there, even though the banks of the River Thames in the September rain, you know, people are determined to do it. And that's a 4.5-day period. It ends at 6:30 on Monday morning, just before the state funeral. I mean, you know, you can see some of the crowds here willing to stand in the rain to witness some of the history that's unfolding in front of them. And the rain is clearly no deterrent for them being here. Look at that shot of the Mall.
This is amazing, isn't it? But Anna, it just makes me wonder what is it about gathering, as we all do for these royal occasions, and the significance of a lying in state? I mean, in historical terms.
I mean, the lying in state begun with the Stuarts, really, but for the modern era, it began with Edward VII, rather, in 1910, and from then all the monarchs have lain in state. We think most recently, of course, of the Queen Mother in 2002, the Queen's father, George VI, and it was described then as the Great Queue, this queue that snaked over Lambeth Bridge and around. And I mean, by any indication, the numbers that are going to be here, witnessing history, yes, but, you know, also this is about the Queen. Princess Anne reflected in her statement, you know, we shouldn't forget just what she is and represents for national identity. And I think, you know, the people here are here to welcome home in the most tragic circumstances, albeit she was a woman in her 90s, but still the significance of the loss is here, I think, with the people queuing in the rain.
Yes, indeed, and they are determined to see and witness, aren't they? Well, earlier today, the new King paid tribute to his late mother's legacy as he paid his first visit to Northern Ireland as monarch. At Hillsborough Castle, he met political leaders from all sides, shaking the hands of Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill. And Charles pledged to follow the Queen's work to bring about peace and reconciliation.
In the years since she began her long life of public service, my mother saw Northern Ireland pass through momentous and historic changes. Through all those years, she never ceased to pray for the best of times for this place and its people, whose stories she knew, whose sorrows our family had felt, and for whom she had a great affection and regard.
Well, Rufus Evelyn is at St Anne's Cathedral in Belfast, where a Thanksgiving service was held for the Queen earlier on today. The King and the Queen Consort attended along with senior politicians from Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And Rupert, the politics of peace was very much a key part of this service, wasn't it?
I think it really was, and the politics of peace, as you put it, has been on display here. in Northern Ireland today. There is almost a significant moment in everything that happens in this nation when it comes to the relationship between the King, the royal family, and the people of Northern Ireland. And a lot of that stems back, as we know, right back through the Troubles, and then, you know, the overcoming and the peace process. We saw the Queen here in 2012, that moment, that iconic moment actually in Northern Irish history, when the Queen met with and shook hands with Martin McGuinness. And today we again see the royal family shaking hands with members of Sinn Féin, an organisation once that, you know, was involved in trying to really not bring down the monarchy as such, but was revolting against it and wants republicanism. And you've got all these issues wrapped up in what can be quite a divided country. And then you get these moments, don't you, like today, when other sides and opponents are shaking hands with each other. And yes, they've been drawn together by the death of the Queen. But I think it's important to see these things happen. Whichever side of the political fence anybody is on in this nation, they do have significance, and not just for the politicians of the royal family, but also for the people, many of whom are gathered outside the cathedral here at St Anne's today to give their condolences to the King, the people that I spoke to, but also to celebrate. And some of them even found time for a moment in which they could, you know, impress on them some of the issues. I spoke to some people from the Scouts, for example, who said to me that, you know, they were able to have a very brief conversation about the problems in recruiting volunteers for the Scouts. And so even these little moments are important, whether it's the politics or the people, and I think it has been a very valuable moment here for all sides in Northern Ireland today.
OK, Rupert Evelyn in Belfast, thank you. And Chris Ship's still with me, but it is interesting, isn't it? Even beyond the grave, the Queen is still managing to exert influence, and that aim she had of reconciliation and bringing people together, still very much at the fore today.
Well, everyone still remembers and still talks about that famous handshake that the Queen did with Gerry Adams and other members of Sinn Féin even now. And the Queen clearly knew the significance of that at the time. And don't forget all the sort of personal pain that she suffered in Northern Ireland with the killing of Lord Mountbatten as well. And I've travelled to both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland with the then Prince Charles, the now King, and he is passionate about the island of Ireland. He has a great affection for the Republic and always makes sure that he travels there every year. And of course, he can no longer, and he said in his address, he can no longer campaign in the same way that he did when he was the heir to the throne, of course. But I think when it comes to Northern Ireland, he will still have private audiences with the leaders there, audiences that, you know, the words of which will never leak. And he has a right as sovereign to consult and to warn and to advise his political leaders. So he will be making sure, not in the public domain, but certainly in those private audiences, that doing everything he can to ensure that peace continues on the island of Ireland.
Chris, thank you. Well, with the Queen's flight just minutes away now, let's return to Rebecca Barry at RAF Northoltz. And Rebecca, preparations have been made and everyone is ready for the arrival of that plane.
Yeah, the weather here is bleak to match this moment. We've been watching as members of the Queen's Colour Squadron march out in perfect unison as they prepare to form a guard of honour to meet the Queen's coffin. You cannot underestimate just how meticulously this moment has been planned. Years of planning have gone into this moment. The Royal Air Force determined to give their former Commander-in-Chief a dignified final journey home. The Princess Royal is once again accompanying the coffin, and we expect to see her leave the aircraft first when it arrives here. Then the coffin, draped in the Royal Standard, will receive a guard of honour from 96 members of the Queen's Colour Squadron. A coincidence, actually, that it's 96, mirroring the 96 years of the Queen's long life. The squadron will then give a royal salute, and the coffin will depart in a state hearse, making its way to Buckingham Palace. We were told to arrive here hours early because they anticipate that the roads will be clogged with thousands of people hoping to catch a glimpse of the hearse. It will make its way east towards the centre of London. It will go past Marble Arch, down Park Lane, past Hyde Park Corner, onto Buckingham Palace, and there, of course, it will be met by the King. Just imagine how many times he will have met his mother in that palace before, and yet now everything has changed.
Rebecca Barry at RAF Northolt's, thank you. And Major General Sir William Cubitt is with me, and we're looking now at members of the RAF who are lining up to greet the coffin and the next bit of ceremonial.
We are looking at the Guard of Honour of the Queen's Colour Squadron of the Royal Air Force and the King's Colour of the Royal Air Force there, shrouded because of the occasion. And there will be a bearer party of the Royal Air Force Queen's Colour Squadron as well. It's right and proper. The Royal Air Force have been in charge of the coffin for this stage. RAF Northolt is special to the royal family as it is the oldest airbase in the country. It actually predates the Royal Air Force, established in 1915 with the Royal Flying Corps. But here we have the principal dignitaries awaiting the arrival of the aircraft.
And the chaplain as well, ready to receive the coffin. And that will then be put into the royal hearse. Chris?
The State Hearse, yes, and there you can see the Secretary of State for Defence, Ben Wallace, standing next to the Prime Minister Liz Truss, who's herself had a very busy time over the last couple of days. She has been in all the nations that the King has been in. She was with us in Scotland yesterday, she's been in Northern Ireland today, and now there she is talking to her Defence Secretary at RAF Northolt, awaiting the arrival of the King.
It's been quite the first week in power for the Prime Minister, hasn't it? Remarkable.
Who could have predicted what would have happened in the days after she met the Queen on Tuesday, wasn't it? In the drawing room at Balmoral Castle. Those pictures of the Queen, I think everyone agreed, looking frail, but nobody massively surprised that she was looking frail at the age of 96, and it's just the following day that the Queen had to cancel the Privy Council meeting that was due to take place to meet the new members of the cabinet in the new government.
And Boris Johnson has said that when he met the Queen as the outgoing Prime Minister just last week, she was, he said, sharp and bright as a button, and he said frail, but absolutely on it, I think was his phrase. And the decline was very sudden, clearly.
I think, Mary, those I spoke to in the weeks and months before the Queen's passing always mentioned just how sharp she was, just how on it she was, just how aware of world events and the political events for her Prime Minister and her government she was. And that's, I think, why it was all the more surprising, her rapid decline in health in the 2 days, wasn't it, after she met her outgoing and incoming Prime Minister. Liz Truss, of course, her 15th Prime Minister, and she said goodbye to her 14th, Boris Johnson, when he departed Balmoral Castle just on Tuesday, her last official act.
And worth reminding ourselves that extraordinary thought that her first Prime Minister was...
a week ago this all happened.
A week ago, yeah. And her first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill, who was born in 1870-something. So, you know, she has spanned history, hasn't she?
Yeah.
Modern history. Really.
Winston Churchill, who clearly will have remembered fighters from the Battle of Britain leaving this airfield that Bill was just talking about, which predates the RAF as fighters took off from there to take on the German Luftwaffe. That was a reminder that the Queen's first Prime Minister was the man in charge of persecuting that war or defending this country against Nazi forces in the Second World War.
And also worth reminding viewers, I think, that there is going to be a minute's silence on Sunday at 8 p.m. and that was something that was introduced by the Queen's grandfather, George V, I believe, Armistice Day, wasn't it? And it was 2 minutes silence then. And he said it was a moment for people to take time out of their busy lives and to reflect upon, in that case, the carnage and the loss and the waste of the Great War, as it was called. But the idea of the minute's silence is coming through now, and we will be doing so as a nation, as a United Kingdom on Sunday evening.
Yeah, 8 o'clock on Sunday evening, and I think we had an indication of the problems that the Queen's mobility was causing her when she pulled out of the Remembrance Sunday service last November.
Yeah.
This was about honouring the fallen, honouring those from many wars who had given their lives, and it's something the Queen never missed. Yes, in later years she used to watch it from the balcony of the Foreign Office, but it was an indication of her, the difficulties that she was having doing her duties as head of state and head of nation when she pulled out of that service just last November.
Magnificent sight, Bill, of all those medals on the uniform of the Royal Air Force officers who are waiting for the arrival of that aircraft. And so here we see it, the lights of the plane coming in over RAF Northolt, and the tension no doubt rising on the ground, and they need to be ready to do their duty.
Yes, indeed. I mean, this is the Royal Air Force very much on show here. Royal Air Force Station, Royal Air Force aircraft, and the Queen's Colour Squadron as the Guard of Honour.
It left Edinburgh Airport in glorious golden evening light after a beautiful sunny couple of days, and it approaches London in the grey, drizzle, miserable weather, really quite suitable in many ways. A capital putting on a show of sombreness, if you like, for the returning late monarch.
This is a very impressive plane. It might be carrying a very small but important cargo today, but it's a kind of plane that would normally carry Chinook helicopters, military vehicles, other big heavy items of military equipment in and out of places like Iraq and Afghanistan.
And Ukraine very recently.
And operating in Ukraine very recently, and even evacuating. You remember those pictures from Afghanistan when people were crowded onto those military aircraft? Well, today it has just one piece of cargo, and a very important piece of cargo at that.
But accompanying the coffin, the Princess Royal and her husband.
Yes. From the times I've been on that plane, there are some seats towards the pilot's area where you can sit. Otherwise, you've got to sit, like you do in military aircraft, on the benches facing into the middle of the plane.
It will have been an hour of reflection, perhaps, for the Princess Royal, away from the cameras, away from the gaze of the world, and a chance to have some time with her mother's coffin, perhaps.
Yes, and at some point in the flight, the Royal Standard in Scotland was replaced with the Royal Standard, and there will be a bearer party from the RAF ready to carry the coffin into the state hearse for the journey to London.
And we can see it approaching RAF Northolt. And here it comes. And as that C-17 Globemaster taxis to a halt, we will see how it is received by the massed officers of the Royal Air Force waiting in front of the airport building, just ahead of where the plane is now. A chance for the Royal Air Force to shine again, Bill.
Well, they'll have no trouble doing that. The Queen's Colour Squadron specialise in the ceremonial side of duties, as well as being the Royal Air Force's infantry, so they're very well up to this. Very smart indeed.
Remember, throughout the flight, that C-17 has been bearing the call sign Kitty Hawk, the official call sign for any military flight with the Queen on board. And this is the very last time the Royal Air Force will carry the Queen in flight for her final air journey on her way to Buckingham Palace.
It is a sad thought, isn't it, to think this woman who was so widely travelled, she went to more places than almost anyone, I think, over her years, and she will fly no more now. She's home on our soil, and she will not be going anywhere else now.
She would take internal flights in recent years. In fact, it was in 2015 that the Queen stopped international travel after a visit to her former home in Malta. There was a Commonwealth Heads of Government summit there. She went to see the home that she once lived at with her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. But she stopped travelling in 2015 as her age advanced, and left the international travel to the then Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, and of course increasingly Prince William and Kate, now the Prince and Princess of Wales.
They stepped up as she withdrew a little bit from her active duties, as you so rightly say.
Yes.
But she went to so many countries over her life, didn't she? All the countries of the Commonwealth. She's often referred to as the most famous woman in the world, and she was so visible for so many years, wasn't she? And just, Bill, to turn to you for a moment, explain what the monarch means to the armed services.
Well, of course, the monarch is the commander-in-chief of all the armed forces. They are the armed forces of the Crown. Additionally, the Queen had particular relationships with certain parts. Say the Queen's Colour Squadron, bears the name of the Queen. So she's got sort of two levels. One is she's the figurehead of everybody, indeed the commander of them all, but also she has particular relationships with individual parts.
Chris?
I've got some information from Buckingham Palace that I can bring you, Mary, and that is that the Queen's coffin, after it has been taken from here at RAF Northolt to Buckingham Palace, where we are, we now know that it will be received at Buckingham Palace by the King, the Queen Consort, and the Queen's children and grandchildren, along with their spouses. So, therefore, King Charles, the Queen Consorts, the Duke of York, Prince Edward, Princess Anne, who's clearly on that plane at the moment, and then the Queen's grandchildren. So we are to presume that the Prince and Princess of Wales are going to turn up imminently.
The Sussexes?
Perhaps the Sussexes as well. It says the Queen's grandchildren, so clearly Princess Beatrice and Eugenie and their spouses. So
Zara Tindall, Peter Phillips.
She had lots of grandchildren, of course.
She sure did.
So we now know that they will all, as a big family, including Lady Sarah Chatto and